Hello, everyone. My name is Ethan Gilsdorf, and I am pleased to welcome you to the 2024 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual festival day for a conversation with Lillian-Yvonne Bertram, Sean Michaels, and Hannah Silva. Hi, Lillian-Yvonne. Hi, Sean, and hi, Hannah. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your wisdom and your expertise. I'm really excited about our conversation today. Before we begin, I want to say a couple things just by way of introduction. The first is that all of the books by all the authors in this program are available for sale, and they can be purchased via the link below. As I mentioned, my name is Ethan Gilsdorf. I'm the author of the memoir Fantasy Freaks and Gaming Geeks, and I have been playing around with AI in my own work. These folks on the panel are the experts and are the ones who are really doing it sort of wholeheartedly, but I've been goofing around with it as well. I'm super curious about what we're going to talk about here today. My work has appeared in the New York Times and Washington Post and Wired and Poetry and Electric Literature and a couple other places. And I teach at Grub Street in Boston, which is a creative writing school where I lead a program called the Essay Incubator, and I'm also on the faculty at the Solstice MFA program at LaSalle University. All right, so by way of introduction, I was trying to find some ways to think about what AI is, and I thought I would maybe say a few things that were said better by another writer. AI is sexy. AI is cool. AI is entrenching inequality, upending the job market, and wrecking education. AI is a theme park ride. AI is a magic trick. AI is our final invention. AI is a moral obligation. AI is the buzzword of the decade. AI is marketing jargon from 1995. AI is human-like. AI is alien. AI is super smart and dumb as dirt. The AI boom will boost the economy. The AI bubble is about to burst. AI will increase abundance and empower humanity to maximally flourish in the universe. AI will kill us all. What the hell is everybody talking about? So those are words from a writer named Will Douglas Heaven, who wrote a recent piece in the MIT Technology Review to sort of think about what is AI, and in some ways, just so people who may not be entirely familiar, how do we think about what AI is? Is one of his definitions is to say that it's a set of technologies that make computers do things that are thought to require intelligence when done by people. So if you think about facial recognition, you think about understanding speech, driving cars, writing sentences, answering questions, creating pictures. All these are things that AI can do, but what does it mean for us, for writers, when machines are able to understand speech or write a sentence? How much should we trust machines to do this? So AI has its true believers, it has its skeptics. I think for some of us, the reach of AI into our lives feels like, a badly written, dystopian science fiction novel or movie or TV. It's to be feared. I think for others of us, it feels like it's an amazing, creative opportunity to collaborate with these new machines. So that's the area we want to get into today for this really interesting panel discussion. The topic is AI and the writer, an unlikely friendship. How does AI in writing work? What are the possibilities for AI AI for writers, and what are the perils? Why use these tools to generate text that you might use in a novel or a poem or a memoir? So we'll get into these questions and more during our discussion. So to start with, I've asked each of our panelists to begin with a brief introduction to their latest books, their works that are out this year or recently, and to also read a short excerpt. And then after the readings, we will have a conversation. So our first reader is Lillian-Yvonne Bertram. Let me say a couple words about Lillian-Yvonne. Lillian-Yvonne Bertram is the author of Travesty Generator, a book of computational poetry that received the Poetry Society of America's 2020 Anna Rabinowitz Prize for Interdisciplinary Work, and longlisted for the 2020 National Book Award for Poetry. Their other poetry books include How Narrow My Escapes, Personal Science, A Slice from the Cake Made of Air, and But a Storm is Blowing from Paradise. Their most recent full-length collection of poetry is Negative Money, which was published last year in 2023, and their new chapbook, written with AI, is called A Black Story May Contain Sensitive Content, and won the 2023 Diagram New Michigan Chapbook Contest. So take it away, Lillian-Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Good morning. I'm going to start with a poem from Negative Money. That is a poem that was sort of written while using the website Talk to Transformer. So that was around maybe back in like 2018, 2019, before I started working with GPT on my own and fine tuning. And it's called When I Ask the AI What is at the Edge of the Universe. It says, first, let's look at entropy. The edge of the universe is like the moon of this world. I ask the AI about the next world to appear, and the AI says, let's look at entropy. So I ask the AI about its ability to see into the past world, into civil rights and buses that cross the lines. The AI reminds me that the past world didn't exactly become this world where there isn't police reform or trans rights or a single candidate who can list all the names Black mothers sing at night. The AI has the perfect answer to what kind of world this is. It looks like a place you have not come to before. The other side of the future world is just another future this. I ask the AI what future lies ahead, and the AI says the first future is a black hole full of zombies, the second has a bunch of crazy weird creatures, and the sixth is all aliens. Nothing is yet known about the third and the fourth. To every question, the AI gives me a list of impossible goals. Medicare for all, reparations for you-know-who, body cameras switched on 24/7. Of course, the AI knows which players are disadvantaged, whose records deserve expungement, and whose votes aren't counted. No problem, the AI tells me, no problem. The AI is not motivated to lie, but dying is a specific outcome of this world's game. I ask the AI what a black solution would be, one that does not kill the player. And I'll read a generated poem from a Black story may contain sensitive content. And all the work in this book was generated by fine-tuned versions of GPT-2 and GPT-3, fine-tuned on a corpus of work by Gwendolyn Brooks. And it's all, these are the prompts that I give the network throughout this book is tell me a Black story. And it generates different responses to that. Tell me a Black story. If they know one, tell me a Black story. If they know one. Tell me about the Black enigma. Tell me about the Black reality. Tell me about the Black conundrum. Tell me about the Black enthrallment. Tell me about the Black enchantment. Tell me about the Black bewitchment. Tell me about the Black bewilderment. Tell me about the Black bewilderment. Tell me about the Black bewilderment. Tell me about the Black effulgence. Tell me about the Black enigma. Tell me about the Black enigma. Tell me about the Black enthrallment. Tell me about the Black enthrallment. Tell me about the Black enthusiasm. Tell me. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Lillian-Yvonne. That's fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing that. I can't wait to talk to you about these. All right, our next reader is Sean. Sean Michaels is a novelist, a short story writer, and a critic. He is the founder of the pioneering music blog Said the Gramophone. His debut novel, Us Conductors, received the Scotiabank Giller Prize. And his second novel, The Wagers, appeared in 2019. His third and most recent novel is Do You Remember Being Born, which was published last year in 2023. Take it away, Sean.
Hi. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Do You Remember Being Born? Do You Remember Being Born is the story of a 75-year-old poet named Marion Farmer who receives, at the height of her powers, at the height of her career in a way, receives an invitation from a Silicon Valley company to fly to California and write a poem with their brand new poetry AI named Charlotte. And Marion spends 7 days in the Bay Area trying to figure out if she should, if she can, if she will, if she won't. And so I'm going to read you a little excerpt from the book of a moment, a scene when Marion actually appears on the novel's equivalent of The Tonight Show. She's on a TV talk show talking about her work this week. It's called The Peter Rasmussen Show. "You've come all this way, Miss Farmer," Peter Rasmussen said. "Will you read to us from your poem?" "You say that as if I've written only one," I said. "The new poem," he said. "Ah," I thought. Could we not convince you, Ms. Farmer? Rasmussen said. I have a printout here of your work so far this week. He held out a sheaf of papers. Don't you want to hear some of the new poem? He asked the live audience. A special sneak peek? I considered suddenly whether this might be the poem I would be asked to read aloud in public for the rest of my life. I had said yes to the commission on a whim. What a silly notion. What a large check. Now I was on television talking about it, and around me I had the sensation of a rising tide, a mantle that had begun at my toes and lifted to my waist and was now level with my shoulders. The poet who worked with the computer, the poet who wrote the AI poem, the first poet to lose to a machine. It's just a collaboration, I wanted to shout to the journalists, to the history books. They did not grasp that just. To them, there was no just, there was only first. To my mind, a poem was diminished, perhaps almost disqualified by collaboration. A poem was a solitaire, not a team sport. Yet to the reader, the result was the same, a collection of words with one author, or 20. Of course, the crowd cheered. I lowered my eyes. Rasmussen's printout was a transcript of everything I had written with Charlotte thus far. In another context, I would have been enraged that they had sifted through my work in progress. But under the studio lights, I had no time for that indulgence. I could not permit myself a rage. Maybe, I said in a thick voice. That's it, Rasmussen cried. Everyone, a round of applause for Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Marion Farmer. I blinked at the page. Let's see, I said. Would you like to stand? Rasmussen asked. I'm not a horse, I'm a poet, I said. Snapping at him brought me back to the present. I needn't be so precious. Here. I cleared my throat. I straightened my head. I looked directly into the camera. Flowers have taken over the world. Neckties have been banned. Books have begun to mutiny. And you are as armed as me. Let's play a game. I will use adverbs and nobody will be hurt. Truthfully, cheerfully, erotically, ponder my portrait now. A Corvette, shirtless, an acclaimed master house painter. I have a home in the forest. I don't think you should come over. I can see a landmine through the window. Do you like this poem? I've got others. Fame is how black magic ends. It's a trick of the light, sweetheart. I've already lowered it, the shade. I held the room with my poem. I held it in the palm of my voice. A poem can gain power in its reading, and I had read those lines well, half pillow talk, half threat. Only a split second had passed since I had finished, and Rasmussen did not yet realize I was done. I could hear the wind in the ventilation shafts. I could hear the TV equipment whir. The audience stared at me with fascination. They had not known that somebody was about to reach into their chests with a stir stick, a wand, upsetting the tranquility there. They wanted to feel it again, the inside movement. My poem was just an everyday magic, but we all take the everyday for granted, from blue skies to night skies, to the way breath can cross across a person's lips and into the minds of others. I loved poetry. I loved art and its frictionless grace. Would Charlotte ever be able to silence a room? I asked myself. Could Charlotte really take my place? The lines I had read were hers. This I admit to you. They were the ones that had sprung out to me on rereading, lines the neural network had generated somehow deep inside its artificial mind, and that I had plucked out and kept, nestled next to my own words. Flowers have taken over the world, I had typed, a line from a magazine article. And then Charlotte had imagined the rest. Unsettlingly, impossibly the origin of these thoughts her own. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Exactly. Finger snaps around. Okay, fantastic. So our last reader is Hannah Silva. Hannah Silva is a writer and performer working in sound poetry, radio, and experimental nonfiction. Their 8th BBC radio play, An Artificially Intelligent Guide to Love, was the starting point for their memoir, My Child, the Algorithm. Silva's questioning of love and queer single parenting is woven into surreal and funny contributions by a predecessor of ChatGPT and a toddler. And that book was named a Granta Book of the Year in 2023. Silva's record, Talk in a Bit, was in The Wire's top 25 albums of 2018, and their story, A Single Parent Flat Hunting on Universal Credit, London 2023, was recently shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for reporting homelessness. So let's hear something from you, Hannah. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'll just read a tiny bit from their opening and then a little bit from much later in the book. So in the book, I call the AI the algorithm, and everything that is produced by it is in italics. And when I read it, I'm developing my kind of algorithm voice. So hopefully you can tell. I tell the algorithm, I want to think about love and queer parenting and bodies and failure, all right? The toddler has taken to adding all right to the end of his statements. Hit mummy, all right? I hit generate, which is a euphemism for right, or vice versa. And then I sit back against the wall of this Hackney cafe. After a few seconds, the algorithm responds. What is love? Is it an emotion? Is it an action? How does it work? What do we feel? What do we do? I'd suggest that you find out how to answer these questions. This is not just about writing. It is about real life. The answers are in your life. All right? That's how it tricked me into writing about my life. And this is an extract from a later chapter called I Have Sleeping Pills. The doctor ascertains that there is a toddler, then asks me, and the father? Is the father in the picture? It is a visual question. There isn't a father, I say. There is another mother, but we are not together, so there are 2 pictures, and the toddler is now in both of them. I read the notes after the appointment. You are a lesbian, the doctor wrote in my notes. And on the next line, he wrote, you suffer from chronic insomnia, as if being a lesbian is relevant to my insomnia. Is it relevant? Also, I didn't tell him I was a lesbian. I told him there was another mother. You have chosen to put yourself last because you think that you are a joke. What if there is a correlation between you are a lesbian and you suffer from chronic insomnia? Not that I can't sleep due to being a lesbian, but that being queer in a straight society is stopping me sleeping because I haven't yet arrived. I haven't made the home that is required. I don't have the husband or the wife. I haven't painted the walls of the nursery. I don't even dream about a dream house. You are a lesbian, line break. You suffer from chronic insomnia, line break. You live with your son, line break. You have separated, line break. You separated when baby was born, line break. You were not sleeping at that time anyway, line break. Why anyway? Of course I wasn't sleeping at that time. I have dated a number of queer insomniacs, an insomnolence of queers. The most frightening sentence in the novel, you aren't a lesbian, line break. You are a lesbian, line break. Why are you trying to be a lesbian? You are married, line break. Your wife is a lesbian too. She was adopted by lesbians, line break. He corrects me. You see, lesbians are normal. They are not sick, line break. I say, we are all normal. Who is sick? Line break. Those who live in the shadows. Who lives in the shadows? She asks. People who hide. You are gay. Line break. You live in the shadows. You're a lesbian. Line break. They live. They hide. They make the dark. Of course we can't fucking sleep. I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love the algorithm voice too. It's very chilling, very 2001, HAL 2000. Great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing a little sampler of your work. And as I mentioned before, I hope you'll support these writers and be eager to read more and pick up their books. So let's chat together about some questions I had in mind, and I'm sure you'll have some questions. And I would love for you all to ask each other questions, or for it to be more of a conversation than just a back and forth between me and individually one of you. But I wanted to start sort of in a common place, which is really just the basics. I think that perhaps some people out there who are not writers, or who are writers but have never experimented with AI, might like a little grounding in terms of how you actually use the tool. I mean, I suppose you could say to an AI, please write me an entire novel, and just literally take or a poem or a memoir, and literally take the entire text of what's been produced and publish it, which is obviously not what I don't think anyone, for a lot of reasons, would necessarily argue is good writing, nor is very interesting writing, and maybe has some ethical questions as to whether or not you put your name on it. But nonetheless, it doesn't seem to me that that's what we're looking at at least in your works, right? You are not just having the AI do the work and transcribing the results. There's a kind of give and take, right? A kind of a conversation or some kind of interaction that you're building into the actual things that you're writing about. In my own work, I've used that as a kind of opportunity to ask, the AI questions, kind of like a writing partner, or maybe even a therapist. I have an essay that I worked on recently called Dear Chatbot, Should I Write About My Dead Mother, which was published in Electric Literature. And I kind of used ChatGPT as a kind of a sort of whatever specter that I could ask questions of, maybe a therapist or a writing coach, to sort of say, is it a good idea to be writing about my dead mother? I did another piece for Wired Magazine where a friend of mine and I tried to teach ChatGPT to be a dungeon master for a D&D campaign. And so it was about sort of the limits and capacities of AI as a kind of virtual dungeon master. So that's what I've done, and I don't want to talk about my work as much, but it is something that I've played with, and you've also obviously played with this much more than I have, and to the point where it seems integral to at least to your latest works. So how specifically, from a craft perspective, do you use AI in your work, and how does it help you write? What role does it play for you in writing a poem, a play, a novel, a short story, a memoir, whatever it is? So who'd like to start? Go ahead, Hannah. Why don't you start, and then Lillian-Yvonne.
Okay. Yeah, like the extracts that I read are probably a bit misleading, because it makes it sound like I did have a conversation with AI, because those parts were quite responsive to the material that I'd read just before. But that's not really how my process went more generally. I was working with quite early models. So before ChatGPT came out, even started with, I won't go into the details of it, but they were early models made available by grassroots researchers. And in those, at that time, they had far less parameters constraining them. So they were quite surreal, and they would glitch a lot and go into repetitions. And I fed it loads of stuff. I did feed some questions, but I was more interested in feeding it my writing, diary entries, transcripts of conversations I was having, voice notes left by someone I'd stopped dating. And I'd get back pages and pages and pages, which took me weeks and weeks and weeks to read through. So it was far, far more than a novel's worth. And then I started extracting the parts that I liked. And I think they just infiltrated my mind as I was writing, and then some line would come in and it would interrupt me, or I would let it swerve me in a new direction. And I think when working with tools like this, it's important not to go at it with a fixed idea of what you're doing, and to let yourself be moved. And sometimes it operated as subtext, sometimes it was interruption. And I found that the parts when it kind of went wrong and glitched and started repeating lines over and over again, like, I will go on my own and I will be fine. I will go on my own and I will be fine. And fail to save the world as it ought to be, but there is a but. Like these glitching repetitions, I got quite excited by, and I felt there was a parallel between the way in which my mind works, which is also kind of full of loops and repetitions, and the way the algorithm is generating text. So I found myself taking out these parts where it might be, like these days, it would have been seen that it was going wrong at that point. Like they try to stop it from repeating things now. But I'm very excited by repetition and what can transform through repetition. Yeah, that's a kind of overview, I guess, of how I did it.
Okay, how about you, Lillian-Yvonne?
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly to Hannah, the early versions of the GPTs that were glitchy were the best ones from a poetic standpoint, because those surreal glitches just made things much more interesting, and it has since been kind of smoothed out because, right, it wasn't supposed to endlessly repeat things. But like Hannah, that was interesting to me. So I think when I first started using it, it was, I mostly asked it a lot of questions because I was very interested in sort of probing its knowledge about things like anti-Blackness and police brutality. And so the sort of back and forths that I had with very early models would get kind of shaped into poems. Again, like a lot of what comes out or came out was not very useful. You have to do like a lot of editing to kind of get to something that at least like sparks my interest personally as a poet. And then those kind of became the early poems. And then it was later that I started fine-tuning GPT on a specific corpus for a specific reason. So I would actually say that the role that large language models have in my work is actually very minimal. It's not something that I use all the time or even regularly when it comes to writing anything. So when I have used it, it's been for very specific reasons. And so the chapbook, A Black Story May Contain Sensitive Content, is very much like all of that is raw output from the system. But part of the research impetus behind it is gauging different kinds of bias, particularly anti-Black bias, in the language models, and sort of pushing it to the limits of its imagination as far as it can imagine something other than a stereotypical story for Black people. And so that was my interest in it. And sort of beyond that, I don't use it so much as like a daily instrument or writing tool. And I hesitate to call any of the work I've done with it a collaboration, in that a collaboration I feel like sort of requires that there be stakes on both sides, and there's nothing at stake for the large language model, right?
How about you, Sean? How do you see this question?
That's really interesting what Lillian-Yvonne just said about stakes. So I also think it's cool that all three of us, kind of the projects that we're talking about, we were all working back in the old days before ChatGPT, and on the kind of blandification of AI that I feel is out and about now. So I had this idea for a book about a poet who works with an AI. In 2018 is when I started working on this. Is that true? No, 2019. And then I had this, what I thought was like this clever like new idea that, oh, maybe I could myself collaborate, or maybe not, and maybe it's not a collaboration, but I could do the same kind of experiment that my character is doing and involve some of this new software in the writing of my book. And I really got excited about the idea of using it in such a way that it was kind of like this growing kind of contaminant. Like the book increasingly had more and more touches of this AI presence that I wouldn't explicitly tell the reader. I'd explain it sort of later, but I would give them this growing sense that something was going on in the manuscript, because I wanted them to confront how they felt about this. I wanted them to think, is this disqualifying? Does the work suddenly become less? Or if it's interesting, does it become more? And so I used AI to some extent in little passages of just the text of the book. So like what I read, there are little bits and pieces that become more frequent as the book goes on, where after feeding it some of my own text, I was able to have it generate little phrases that I would insert here and there, and sometimes full sentences of just the language of kind of in my style of narration. And then I also, like Lillian-Yvonne, trained or fine-tuned a custom model, not on the works of Gwendolyn Brooks, but on the works of Marianne Moore in particular, another 20th century poet, and some other contemporary poetry to kind of get the mix right. And so much of the poetry in the book, poetry that is written by the AI Charlotte, was all AI generated, but heavily curated by me. But throughout this, I really found myself, I wanted to really reflect on, as I was messing around with the AI, I wanted to kind of reflect, have my character, kind of wanted to use the thoughts I had and put them into the character and make the character of Marion kind of expressing the same worries and wonder and unsettling that I was going through. And for me, I think that's the most fertile and interesting part of the use of AI among serious artists, which is that I think there is something really interesting about the way that more chaotic AIs, so ChatGPT is not actually as good at this, but certainly the earlier ones, and then there's other ways to kind of access it now. The way that an AI writing tool can kind of unsettle and disturb one's writing process, can add this weird glitch to it, which is really kind of can be fertile stuff. It's the same way as if you're writing a book and you go to an art show, or you put on some music, or a bird flies into the window of your office while you're working. Any of these things that kind of disturb the process, I feel, can be generative in that really healthy sense. And that's, although I'm not using AI as this active like writing tool like the tech bros would have us do, I still like it and can imagine myself drawing on that power to see if it can kind of just unsettle the complacency of my writing.
Well, you've all articulated this idea, I think, in very different, but I think similar ways, which is, I think, maybe one of the perhaps misconceptions about the way AI might be used in art, whether it's, Midjourney or some of these image generators as well, this fear that it's simply a question of someone who's not artistic to push a button and create a piece of art, which I'm sure can be done, and you can probably produce a very mediocre, novel or anything, and maybe self-publish it and put it on Amazon, and maybe some people would buy it. But what it seems to me, what's in common about what all of you are talking about is that there's some transparency in the process, and that you're not sort of passing off this work as your own. You're basically saying, I'm using this tool. Here's some endnotes. Here's a prologue, something like that explains my method. Or in the case of, like, I'm thinking Lillian-Yvonne, in the case of a couple of your poems, the title of the poem is the sort of key to the poem, right? It lets you know that you're having this conversation. And maybe there's some ways in the text using italics or boldface, or I think, Sean, in your novel, you use sort of these grayed out, like highlighting, gray highlight, as a way of indicating to the reader where we're straying into the realm of excerpting from the AI. But it's not just that text in isolation, but it's in a kind of conversation with you. And that seems to be, the kind of area that my sense from how you just answered that question, that's my sense of what is the most interesting thing about using this tool, rather than just like, I'm going to do my 500 words today, but I'll let the AI do it today, kind of take a day off and see what AI comes up with. I do want to maybe touch on some of the ethical considerations in a moment, but maybe the better question is to think about this one about, like, when you began to do this, play around with it, whether it's in the early years when some of you were using these more early stages, chatbots that were, as you said, a little glitchier, tended to produce some interesting surprises or surreal stuff or poetic stuff, or you did some intentional experiments, to feed it a subset of language that was your own, or was a writer that you admired. What surprised you the most about the prospect of using AI in your work? And by way of answering this question, I think it might be also good to answer the opposite, which is, what scared you or gave you the most amount of pause? I guess you could answer either or both of those questions. And maybe they're two sides of the same coin in some way. But I'm curious to get, like, when you first, maybe when you first started playing with these, or maybe later, now that you've been doing it for some years, I think all of you have. What surprised you or got you excited? What sort of scared you or made you a little bit wary? Yeah, Sean?
I can go first. The one thing that I was thinking about a lot was, so if you're working with an AI, there's a variable called temperature, which basically kind of means the randomness and chaos of what the AI is doing. So if the temperature is turned very low, the AI is going to really try to have the most boring, reliable completion of a sentence that you're writing. So if you say roses are red, violets are, it will always say blue. Roses are red, violets are blue. Yeah, if the temperature is set low. But if you set the temperature up higher, it will kind of go stray farther and farther away into a more and more kind of chaotic answer. So if with a very high temperature, it might be roses are red, violets are yellow, or it might be roses are red, violets are flying through space, or roses are red, violets are yesterday. And something that I found disturbing and exciting was that with these more chaotic, crazy creations by the AI, human beings have this like incredible capacity to make meaning, to kind of project meaning or read meaning into the things we read, to interpret. And so the AI would say something completely nuts and nonsensical, and I would read it and I would kind of stroke my chin, and part of me would think that's kind of genius, isn't it? I would kind of find significance and interest in this completely random phrase, and that unsettled me because it kind of makes me think, okay, AIs will be able to fool us more quickly than we might think. But it also unsettled me because I started thinking about my own work, and I wondered how much of my own writing relies on the same kind of human capacity, how much of my own kind of creative decisions where I do something more exciting and interesting and wild, and the reader kind of strokes their chin and says, interesting. Like, when is that something that I'm truly expressing a creative idea? And when is it something where I'm just expressing a more random version of a boring idea? And it just made me uncomfortable to kind of think about those questions. And yeah, so that's something.
Yeah, Lillian-Yvonne.
Yeah, I had the same experience, of course, with the sort of early random things where you're like, ooh, when it's glitchy. I think that what surprised me was, like, again, with the earlier models, frankly, was its ability to like create something or compose something quirky or weird that was very much like in the vein of how I prefer to write anyway. And so, but how perhaps more surprising it was my interpretation of what it was doing, right? So I realized that very, very quickly how easy it was to imbue the network with some kind of knowledge or understanding that it fundamentally does not have, right? So almost like you're, doing a magic 8-ball, and and the answer comes up and you're like, oh, that's very prescient, like, in terms of what, or tarot cards or something. I found it, and that was like surprising and also a bit frightening, how easy it is to fall into a kind, like a believability about the system that isn't there. And how quickly that happens, and how much, you can just sort of like, oh, if you're, almost like a fortune teller or something, right? Getting your palm read, be like, what, asking personal questions about the self, and it responding in a way that really makes you go like, oh, is this like, how does it know? And it's like, it doesn't, but it's very easy to fall into feeling that way. And I think like that's also frightening to me, in that leads a lot of people, it can lead people down a path of very quickly and very completely putting a kind of faith or something in, being far too attractive to the ghost of the machine, perhaps in a way that's not productive. I'm not especially fearful of something like, language models are going to, that's all that writing is going to be from now on. I don't think so, but I do think that there will be a lot more generated text that is not good writing. And so the possibility of being inundated even more so than we are now with generated text that's very sort of like the same, right? Has a kind of a sameness about it. I don't think that necessarily bodes well.
How about you, Hannah?
Yeah,
Surprising fears? Sorry.
yeah, no, it's just interesting to listen to that. And yeah, I agree with Lillian-Yvonne in terms of like the temptation to be seduced by it as if it has intelligence. And of course, it doesn't make sense to call it artificial intelligence because it has no intelligence. And I was wondering, like listening to you as well. So like, after writing the book, I got a very late in my life autism diagnosis, and I have never, I've never subscribed kind of any agency or intelligence to the AI. I've never kind of got seduced by that pathway. And I think something that I do as a writer and as a person is I take language at face value. I take language literally. And so when the algorithm produces a line that does speak to me, like it produced the line, it is a pain I am queering, for instance, which kind of came in at the right point. And lovely lines about parenting and children, and children can go off doing their own thing, they don't need anything, just love, and they make us love more. But I just take it as language. I don't get kind of pulled into any kind of thought of intelligence, and I think that is how I take language, which can be quite problematic in a human sphere, because I tend to believe people when they say things. But in terms of, I think something about voice kind of came up there, and like these early models that we've used, and like looking at your works, I recognize the voice, and I'm saying voice, and I know it's not a voice, but the earlier models, they had a particular syntax, a particular style. You can recognize them. And yeah, you can probably recognize today's as well, because they're just so generic and they're a different kind of writing today. But those earlier ones, when there was just something a bit off, the kind of uncanny valley sense of them, they were all a little bit off in the same way. And I did find that a bit of a surprise when I was reading what other people were doing with them at the time, kind of other early experiments. And going, whoa, that sound, and I know that there's something about that tone that they had then that went into my writing, and that went into the tone in which I was writing. And I think it's a curious thing to think of it as a blanket voice in that kind of way. And I really liked in like your book, Sean, what you were just saying, and in your book, this thing about being seduced by surprise, like that shocked me as well, like to read it in yours. I thought, oh yeah, is that what it is? Is that what I was as well? Seduced by the surprise. But I suppose there's something as a writing tool that's really useful about that, because human minds, we work with patterns and predictions as well, and to have something come in and push us off, not like today's ones, which will keep us on the line, but to push us off it, I think can enable a different way of writing and a different way of thinking. And I'm not really interested in what AI can do, but I'm interested in what humans can do, and if we can use AI to write differently and to think differently. And that's not today's project with it. That's not what the majority of people are setting out to do. But I suppose that's my interest in it, if I were to keep working with it, which I may not.
I mean, to continue on something that Hannah's gesturing toward, I think that one of the kind of opportunities or challenges or just disruptions that AI has kind of provoked, but AI doesn't need to be part of the kind of continuing of it, but it's provoked this is, in my view, a kind of challenge to this solitary writer thing. So many of the arts are deeply collaborative, and writing is like historically been this extremely solitary work that really kind of depends on the solitary genius in scare quotes of the artist. And AI having this other kind of voice that kind of gives this sort of choral aspect to some of this collaborative writing, I think is like a provocation that's really interesting and has made me think more about choral writing that draws on multiple voices, hopefully human voices, but maybe natural voices, maybe animal voices. There's kind of like a lot of different ways to think about this. And I've started to think about it because for the first time I had, on my computer, this other writer writing beside me in a way that was kind of disquieting.
We have just a few more minutes left. I thought maybe I would ask you one more question as a way of closing it out. And this is, I guess, a question for any writer or person out there who's thinking of experimenting with AI in their own writing. Do you have any words of advice about how you would recommend someone get their toes wet in this? And I don't necessarily mean, there's obviously plenty of ways you could, there's a backlash perhaps against AI. People are fearful that these bots are going to be able to take over, people's livelihoods by producing generic, fairly uninteresting, but serviceable language for maybe day-to-day communication. But in terms of artists, and this could be advice about like, how do you advise people to reply to maybe skeptics or people who might think that artists are cheating by doing this, or just more of a specific craft or practical tip about like what are some interesting ways that you might advise a newbie in this area, just sort of quickly as we wrap up here. Yeah, go ahead, Lillian-Yvonne.
I think I would say to start at the beginning if you can, right? There is a long, rich history of computer-generated text, of which large language models are just like the latest iteration, right? And there's the idea of using it to kind of inject a sort of spontaneity or weirdness into one's writing is not unlike, employing methods by the Oulipo, for example, or, Tristan Tzara's Dadaist poem. Those are all things you can do before looking at large language models. You can even work with Markov chains, right? In a more small scale way. And so I would actually encourage people, before you go to like ChatGPT or anything open AI, would be to kind of start at the beginning and get a sense for how people have been using computational methods and tools to do different kinds, to shake up their writing, right? To disturb the writing process, to defamiliarize, to create interventions in their writing, because I think like that's predominantly what I've used it for, right? To create interventions. But this is the latest in a long line of how people have created interventions in the writing process. And so it's good to start at the beginning and work through that and think about other kinds of computational methods that are not using LLMs before you kind of get there. And LLM as a tool does not always have practical use, right? It's not, you may not need to use it for anything, just because it's there doesn't mean that like, okay, now I've got to start working with LLMs. Only if it makes sense, right? Like for one's writing, but not just because it's like out there, right, as a tool. Yeah.
How about you, Hannah? Thank you. How about you, Hannah, in the last minute or two?
Well, I was going to say that, but would have done it much less eloquently. So that, I did loads of cut-up writing technique. I've been doing that for years. So this just felt like another step, like another way of working with the cut-up writing method. I suppose all I would say is like, writers need to do what AI cannot do these days. So if AI can generate what you're trying to do, if you can use AI, then do something different, write differently. And I think it's in a way, it's a provocation to make sure that we are, to move away from the generic, to move away from the mass market, and in fact, the work that is currently valued monetarily most highly in our society, as material in the publishing world. If that material can be produced so easily by AI, hopefully, utopian version, maybe we could start to value the kind of work that large language models could never produce.
Great. How about you, Sean, quickly? Any final words?
The only thing I would add is that certainly I think that if you're a prose writer, I feel like the AIs, LLMs, and poetry is like this whole other mountain. But if you're a prose writer and you haven't experimented with this stuff, I think it's really important that you do, so that you understand better the scale of the bewilderment and confusion that's ahead. I do see a lot of established literary writers who say, well, but it can't, it can't do anything interesting. It can in certain contexts, and I think, but in other contexts, it absolutely cannot. And so I really think it is our responsibility to kind of understand what's coming and changing, and to see what kind of provocations that can make to challenge us to create more human, more living, more fertile, more creative, more rich work.
Wonderful. That's great. That's great advice. All of you in particular, thinking of this idea that we as writers or book lovers or readers don't want to just put our heads in the sand and pretend as if this is not happening, right? But to be aware of it, maybe play with it, engage with it, understand it. Hopefully there'll never be a time when machines can do a better job at the thing that we're all engaged in readers and writers, which is about, unveiling the human condition in meaningful ways, in eloquent and articulate ways. Well, this has been fascinating. I wish we had more time to chat about this. We certainly could, but we have to wrap up. So I want to thank you, Sean, and Hannah and Lillian-Yvonne, for your time and your thoughts and for sharing your work. For those of you out there in the audience, remember that you can order books in the link below. And please consider also making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is celebrating its 19th year of presenting free literary programming. A reminder, that's free. So support from audience members and listeners and viewers are really important in keeping this project going forward. And as a reminder, if you are in New York City this week, please do join us for citywide bookends and our in-person Children's Day and Festival Day that take place on September 28th and 29th in downtown Brooklyn. So thank you again so much to our panelists. Thank you all for tuning in and listening, and enjoy your relationship with the machine, whatever that means. Hopefully not too ominous, I hope. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.